It'd be like, Bill. It'd be like Sue. What was that chapter about? Mary. What were the main ideas? What would you do with it? So just make sure you answer those questions. You can write them down ahead of time. That's fine. But just write them out so you have them on hand when you come back for class. All right. All right, now let me overview. If you brought your book, you can look in the beginning. If you didn't bring it, that's okay. I want to overview the traditions that Bob Craig has put out as forming the field of communication studies, and that M. Griffin, who wrote the textbook, decided to organize some of his book around. So this is Bob Craig's scheme of the 7 traditions. Now, here was the problem. Historically, communication studies was interested in public speech. So the field of communication studies goes way back to Aristotle and Socrates, and before him to the sophists. We talk about people who were teaching people how to give public speeches. And they had a theory of persuasion. What will be the most effective way for me to speak in the courts? What will be the most effective way for me to speak in the Senate, or in the council? And what will be the most effective way for me to speak in a ceremonial occasion? So those were the 3 big things that were happening then. You were either defending yourself in court, you were debating what our city should do, or you were giving a ceremonial speech dedicating a building, praising people who had died in battle, whatever you were doing. You were doing public speech. So the field begins with the study of these things. And people like Aristotle and Socrates write about this. The very first book that was written about, speech as such, public speech, was a book by Aristotle called The Rhetoric. And he wrote a lot of books, and one of them was called The Rhetoric. And so this was about how should people deliberate together about public issues, going to war, building ships, building new highways, whatever. So this was the study. Now, this is way long before science ever shows up in the world scene, right? Does anyone know what years this is? Within 100 years, 200 years? Yeah. This is BCE. BCE. Well, let's say 400, we'll say, roughly. BCE. So this is way back. And so, by and large, the societies are operating on the basis. The Greeks are trying to start to use reason and rationality. They have logic and syllogisms, and they're trying to operate thinking things. By and large, though, you have a lot of tradition. Things operate on a traditional basis. They operate on the basis of mythos or myth, religious thought. They operate on a lot of superstition. We'll put that down as, we'll put faith also. A lot of life is guided by these things. Now, so you have to go pretty far through history, at least Western history. European, this is not Eastern history, Middle Eastern history, this is Western history. You got to go pretty far until you start to get people who say, we've got to operate not on the basis of faith or tradition or superstition, but we've got to operate on the basis of rationality and reason. Anybody know when, roughly, in Western civilization we're talking about, when this kicks in? Within, again, it's a big, we're doing a really rough thing here.
Somewhere between the Middle Ages and Renaissance.
Right, but this is the Middle Ages, Renaissance, so 1200, 1300, 1400, we'll say. So 1200 to 1400 or so, there's paroxysms going on in European history, feudal societies breaking down, people are traveling, exploration is going on. And you get to the end of the 30 Years' War, which was the religious wars in Europe between the Protestants, the Catholics, and the Baptists. So they're all Lutherans and all. Everyone's fighting and killing each other all through for 30 years. And finally, around 1648, they decide we ought to stop this. Why don't we not do this anymore? And this is the time when you get people like Descartes, Erasmus, and other people who start to say, we ought to run society on the basis not on faith, not on tradition, not on superstition or myth. We ought to run society on the basis of rationality and science. Okay, so now we're going to do science and rationality. And so this is to some degree the beginning of the modern period. This is the pre-modern, Middle Ages, modern period starts. Now we're going to stop fighting over religion and we're going to do life scientifically, rationally. We're going to have a secular realm where we will not, those things don't carry the same weight. We operate on the basis of things that can be examined by the five senses and can be tested by scientific method. You know, so the famous example of flies and rotting meat comes out of this time. Does anybody know that example? People, yeah, how'd that go?
People, it was like the theory of spontaneous generation, where like people would think that if you left meat out, flies would magically appear off of the meat.
Right.
But when in reality it was they were laying the eggs, and the eggs were hatching.
So there was a tradition that if you left rotting meat out, it would generate flies. And people all believe that. Where do flies come from? They come from rotting meat. You know, they just pop out of rotting meat. Well, someone scientifically said, well, let's test that. Let's cover some rotting meat with a glass bowl and see if flies appear. Lo and behold, flies didn't appear. So that's just an example of testing something scientifically versus the traditional way of believing it. And so they said, we're going to test everything. René Descartes said, I'm going to doubt everything. So he was a radical skeptic. But I'm only going to believe what I can prove scientifically. That it didn't really work out that way, but that was the thought. So then science comes in, and science succeeds wonderfully, right? It improves the quality of life. Businesses begin to organize themselves scientifically. Technology advances. Medicine advances. We get rid of diseases. We build cars, airplanes, roads. Great, right? Progress, progress, progress. And so the modern period praised science. And so this kind of stuff got pushed out a little bit. This kind of thought got kind of suppressed as non-scientific. But there were scientific studies done of things like propaganda. You know, how does propaganda work? How do people get persuaded? One of the classic ones here are tall people and short people. You know, who's more persuasive, a tall person or a short person? Tall people. So People will believe tall people and do what tall people ask sooner than they'll do what short people ask. So there were scientific studies done about this. And there were conclusions made about communication and all. Well, come around the again, this is very rough history, 1940s to 60s, post-World War II. People begin to wonder whether rationality and science are going to do it for us. Because bad things are starting to happen around the world, like atomic weapons. Now, most of you didn't grow up in this time, and I just sort of grew up in this time. But there was a time when it was pretty close to the edge, that someone was going to push a button and everything was going to be gone, because we had thousands of missiles, and it was called mutual assured destruction, otherwise known as MAD, which is ironic, but whatever. You know, that no one would dare attack us, because if they do, we'll totally destroy them. So we assure each other of total destruction. So that's where we get a détente. And people were like, wait a minute, is this where science led us? Is this where we got by doing everything rationally and scientifically? And there were books like 1984 written, and there were books like Brave New World written about dystopias, right? Not a utopia, but a dysfunctional topia. Dystopias. And the Holocaust happened in Europe, and so we're like, you know, it doesn't look like science is going to do it all. So people lost faith in science, and so this is called the end of the modern, to some degree. This is called postmodern, where we better get back to things that are non-scientific. So see what happens from a university perspective, or from a communication studies perspective. What happens is we've been working on scientific theories of communication. You know, about tall people are more persuasive than short people. Propaganda happens this way, you know. And all of a sudden now science is not the whole story. And you have people in communication studies saying, we got to get back to some looks at the human part of communication, and not just the scientific part. People are not machines. You can't study them like you study nature. So humans are different than nature. So we get into this fight between scientific ways of doing communication studies and interpretive, humanistic ways. Humanistic ways. So you're going to run into this in your textbook, that there are some theories that are like science. You know, they're like testing, hypotheses, research methods, you know, bang, 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 bang. And you're going to get other theories that are like just talking about stuff. You know, there's no evidence, there's no scientific research behind it. It's observation and reflection on human behavior. And so our field is kind of struggling with these things. You know, what kind of theories do we want? And Bob Craig has got to the point where he says we need all of them. So we're not going to just throw out some of them. We need all of these things. So anyway, we came into the postmodern period. Has anybody studied postmodernism? Foucault, Lyotard, Baudrillard, all these fun people. All right. Well, anyway, there's a bunch of people who said, to heck with science, nothing matters, Sartre, existentialism, you know, life is just stinks and then you die. You know, nihilism. You had a whole bunch of things going on here. And then, after this, around the 1980s or so, people began to say, you know, this whole postmodern thing is not really helping us very much. We've got a bunch of people running around who are cynics and nihilists, and they don't believe in any big things beyond themselves. They're relativists. This is not very good. What we have to do is recover a sense of community. So there's something that's awkwardly called postmodernism that says, you know, maybe there are no absolute truths, that we can, and maybe progress is not always good, but there are better ways to live than other ways. You can say something is better than something else. And we have to learn to live together. So there are a whole bunch of authors who are in the postmodern time. You'll run across Habermas. This is where Barnett Pierce is. Bob Craig is kind of in this camp, where they're trying to put it back together and say, you know, okay, science doesn't have all the answers, but if we just blow it up and everyone goes their own relativistic way, that's not going to help us either. So we better figure out how to live together in community and how communication can help us create a livable social world. So this is postmodernism. So a lot of the writing that you're going to run into will have a community dimension to it. We'll have the question of how do we create livable, humane arrangements of people who are not killing each other, blowing each other up, doing violence to each other. So this is the sequence. So out of this whole mess come 7 traditions. Before I hit the 7 traditions, anybody want to make a comment, thought, disagree? This is a pretty broad outline.
It might seem to me that a lot of the development in the area of communication studies coincides with the development of technology and communication.
Yeah, well, there's a whole technology dimension to mass media.
But it wasn't until technology allowed for such mass communication around the globe that communication studies were even as much of an issue or even as relevant.
Yeah, but this train always continued somewhere. The political speech, deliberation about the best course of action for a community to take. Yeah, but pamphlets and the printing press and radio and television and now the internet changed the whole dynamics of it. Yeah, those of you in PR are looking at the breakup of the ability to address a mass audience. You know, you're dealing with segmented audiences now. So, and creating separate messages for all these segmented audiences. So, but anyway, so out of all this comes these different things. So one tradition is the rhetorical tradition. So you know something about that already. Let me erase this. So you have the rhetorical tradition, which has to do with public deliberation, persuasion, questions of speeches in the court, in ceremonial occasions, and in public choices and decisions. So this is the rhetorical theory. It uses people like Aristotle, but there are contemporary theorists too. And we'll look at them. All right. But then you also understand why we have a socio-psychological tradition of theories. So let me see if you can do this. Why do we have a socio-psychological tradition of communication theories? You want to? No.
Because your brain and your environment control the messages that you put out there.
Okay, so one of the ordinary ways we talk about this is to say people are individuals and they have brains that process stuff, and that's where the words come out of. So there was a scientific study of humans called psychology. And so we connected with that and we created theories to explain how does the human brain process messages? How do people construct sentences? How does that work in a brain? You get theories like cognitive complexity here that say that some people have more complicated ways of understanding the world than others. They have more language to describe the world. So, you know, if like colors, you know, if I say, you know, if some people say, well, that's black or white, you know, it's this way. Other people can distinguish more shades of things. You know, if I say something is green, you might say, well, there's about 15 kinds of green. Which green do you mean? You know, so if you have a more complex way of describing the world, you're better able to navigate your way through the world. So cognitive complexity, and one of the meaningful parts of cognitive complexity is that research has demonstrated that children who grow up in cognitively complex homes will succeed more, will have better jobs, higher salaries than children who grow up in cognitively simple homes. So if children grow up in a home where they hear parents or guardians discussing issues in complex ways, they then are more likely to succeed as adults in the world. So that's a research finding about communication in the home. That's a socio-psychological theory. So then we have sociocultural theories. So you have other theories that say, you know, it's not about the individual, what's going on in their brain, it's about how people relate to each other. That's what's important about when we look at communication. So how does peer pressure work? You know, and how do people how do they create together the language that they use? How do subgroups or co-cultures create separate languages that they use and codes that identify them? So you have a rhetorical set of theories, you have a socio-psychological set of theories, you have a socio-cultural set of theories. So some theories overlap, but these are the different kinds of things you're going to run into along the way. All right, so you're going to have what we call cybernetic theories. Does anyone know what the word cybernetic means, or when you hear cybernetic, what do you think about? Technology, computers. This actually developed way before that. The word Kubernetes is the Greek word, Kubernetes, which was the word for a ship steersman. That's really important for you to know, right? But it was the word, whoever was at the ship's steering was the Kubernetes, was the cybernetic, the cyborg, I guess it would say, you know, back in Greek time. He was the one who was in control of what was going on. So cybernetics is really the study of control systems. How do systems get controlled and shaped? So the thermostat system in a room, you know, is a cybernetic process where it controls the temperature, and this affects that, affects that, affects that, and it all creates some level of temperature. So how do people affect each other to establish some kind of stability, right? So you go to you get a new job, you go to a new office, and you're the new broom, and you start to do things differently. What happens? What's that?
Ruffle feathers.
You ruffle feathers, people put pressure on you, they mess up your job a little bit, and all of a sudden you come into line, right? You do it their way because it's too painful not to do it their way. Well, what happened? You got controlled by the system. The Kubernetes kicked in. So cybernetics is a study of how systems move information around and how that information leads to the stability, which in our world is called homeostasis. Anybody biology person here? You talk about this in biology too. How does a cell regulate itself? How does the body regulate itself? Why does your body temperature stay the same? You sweat, you shiver. It's because there's a system that maintains a certain level. So humans do that too. In fact, there are theories that say all organized cytoplasm does this. You can study cells, you can study animals, you can study humans, and they all react the same way in terms of connecting the relationships. So it's pretty interesting. So cybernetic theories, we'll look at some cybernetic theories. This is a lot of org-comm. So org-comm person, one person. This is good for us, org-comm people, yeah. All right, so then you have a semiotic tradition. These are the people who are really interested in visual images. So when I was in my doctoral studies, we had to take a Pepsi commercial and we had to take it apart frame by frame and do an analysis of it for the colors, the arrangement of the people, the kind of people. I did some Pepsi commercial about a flying saucer and a boy and a dog on a farm, and and you had to answer the question: why these colors? Why this setting? Why a boy? Why this boy? Why this age of a boy? Why this dog? Why this kind of a dog? Looking at all the symbols, what are the colors? What are the arrangements of it? So if you look at ads, you'll start to do this, the design of ads. Who is in the picture? Where are they standing? Why are they standing that way? So you look at visual, but it's really all about symbols. What does a symbol mean? How does a symbol come to mean that? How does a symbol take on new meanings? Where do words come from? What is a word? How does a word mean anything? So this is semiotics. A lot of people like semiotics. And it's a lot of fun. You get to analyze magazine ads, and do stuff like that. So semiotics can be a very good field. People who've studied semiotics have done analyses of professional wrestling. So they ask, what's going on? How are the meanings communicated? What are the forms that it takes? Why do these symbols work in society? They study film semiotically. So that's a theory of communication. Those of you who will be doing PR and branding and logo design and stuff like that, semiotics is stuff that you're going to be dealing with. What does this color mean? Can I use this color? Should I use this color or not? So, all right, so we got semiotic, 2 more, right? Do I need 2 more? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Start over here. Semiotic, phenomenological. This is also your existential. These people got fed up with all these other people doing all these big analyses. They say, look, people talk to each other, and that happens. I don't need to know how it goes on in the brain. I don't need to know how they created those symbols. Let's just look at what really happens and watch really closely. What do people do? How do they talk about things? So this is what appears, the phenomenology of it. What is the appearance, the on surface, so to speak? What do people really do, and how do they do it? So this looks very closely at what goes on in everyday conversations and asks what are people interpreting? This is where you talk about interpretation. How do people create interpretations of what's going on? That's the phenomenological. So those of you, again, there are people here who are scientifically inclined. You like numbers, you like research, you like stuff like that. There are people like that. Yes, there are. I've met them. I had one last year. and so there are some theories that you'll really be attracted to. And you will look at socio-psychological theories and you'll say, yeah, that works for me. And you'll look at these and you'll say, that's a bunch of fluff. But I got other people here who love to talk with friends. They're social people. They love to go out. They love to be with people. And you put a number in front of them and they like, what's that? So they love this. They love these theories because it's all about what's going on between people and how you're interpreting what I said and why did you think of it that way. Phenomenological theories work good for a bunch of people. If you're a person who loves to go to movies, you know, and you like to talk about movies a lot. You're a semiotic kind of a person. You're a person who likes to do advocacy, and you're all about Darfur, and you're all about, you know, advocacy groups and changing society and move on and all that. You like rhetorical theories. And you like critical theories, which is the last one. And the critical theories are questions of power, money, interests, marginalized groups. So critical theories look at that. Here's a question for you that'll get at critical questions.